Hello, good afternoon, and welcome, and good morning to those of you who are not on the East Coast. We're very pleased to have this afternoon session of the PCA Live, where today we're going to be talking all about state associations. And today what we really wanted to do was to highlight some successes that we've had, specifically with the Maryland State Association, and the amount of work that Maryland and the retailers there in Maryland have done over the past year or so. More so longer building up to it, but most recently just given so much of the work and the mountain of challenges that Maryland has faced over this past year, from shutdowns and taxes, et cetera. So we're really happy to be joined today by some of the leaders of the Maryland State Association, as well as their lobbyists. And what we really wanted to dive into today was talk about their experiences, so that way we could kind of dive into what have they done, lessons learned, successes, and really hopefully sort of sparking some ideas for a lot of you out there in terms of what is it our state association is doing. Do we even have a state association? How do we get on this and get moving forward with our state association? So it'll be really good to hear from these retailers in terms of how they've been organized and how well they've attacked these situations, so that way they can make sure that their retail stores have been able to reopen and fight against some of these owners' taxes and these unfair regulations. So we'll bring up Joshua Habursky, head of government affairs here at PCA, who's going to be moderating the session today. There's Josh. We'll be bringing up Finnie Helmuth, who I think many of you know, a past president of the Premium Cigar Association, although at that time it was the IPCPR. How are you doing today, Finnie?
Great. How are you?
Doing great, thank you. And Steve Castro, who's also part of the Maryland State Association. How are you doing today, Steve?
Great, Scott. How you doing?
All right. And the last person, I'm doing well, thank you very much. And so we're going to bring up the Maryland State Association's lobbyist, Matt Boley. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Sounds good. All right, so we're going to go ahead and kick this off. Thank you all for joining us. Appreciate you guys taking the time today to help talk about your experiences there as a state association and how you've really been able to tackle so many of these issues together, and the importance of having a strong organization and being coordinated in that effort. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kick it over to Joshua, who is going to go ahead and lead and moderate the session today. Joshua.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it, and appreciate everybody for joining us today. You know, one of the things that we're trying to do at PCA and work with our state partners is provide best practices and thought leadership. And I thought, what better to do than talk about state associations from folks that are in it and doing a lot of effective tactics and strategies to remain successful in their states. You know, I can say, speaking nationally and working with Glenn and our state operations, if we didn't have strong state associations like the Maryland Association, it would have been a far more challenging year. You know, Finnie, Steve, and Matt, I just want to say kudos for all that you've done in Maryland. And thank you for sharing your stories with us so that we can get new state associations and grow the existing ones from a national perspective. So, Finnie, I want to start with you as the president of the Maryland Association. Can you tell us a little bit about the formation and the history? How did it all come together?
Sure. So back in, I would say it was about the year 2000, I actually had a retailer walk into my store and tell me that Maryland had enacted a 15% tobacco tax on premium cigars. I had no idea. I didn't really even know anything much about Annapolis besides, you know, there were legislators down there that passed bills. And we kind of like laid low and just said, okay, they're going to collect the tax. So the following year they came after us and wanted to take that 15%. I believe it was trying to go to 75%. And we all got very nervous, the retailer I talked to, and we kind of called around to some of the other retailers and we said, we need to get our acts together and find out what we have to do. A few of us went down to testify. It was terrifying. It was our first time in front of a committee testifying. We didn't have a lobbyist. And over the years, they kept coming after us. So we eventually got to the point where we said, we might need some help down here. You know, the bills were getting trickier. They were coming after us with smoking restrictions and display bans. So we hired a couple different lobbyist firms, and we eventually ended up with Matt, who's on the call with us about 3 years ago. And it's been incredible, like just to watch us over time go from no lobbyists to we're with this professional group that's been helping us. And The one thing I will say is states really have to be on their toes, because when it hits hard and they don't stop. So the best thing we ever did was form this group with the retailers, and we get stronger and stronger every year.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to shift over to Steve. What are some basic principles or things to consider when forming a state association? You know, thinking back early on and today, there are a lot of states out there that don't have a premium cigar or retailer association. What advice do you have to them?
Well, the first thing is to have some point people, because you don't want 30 retailers all doing the same thing or talking to the same people. You want to have some key people who are your point people, especially when talking to the lobbyists, talking to key state senators and delegates. The Maryland Board of Elections, we set up a PAC, which is a political action committee, back in 2005. A guy by the name of Mike Copperman, who works for CRA now, helped initiate that. Actually, he did get all the paperwork done for us and set that up, which really helped as far as being able to get money from various sources, put it all together. So then now we can go to the state senators and delegates, their fundraisers, and be able to contribute to them, so that we have people that were on our side that knew us, and it was a way to get to meet them and get to know them. So that's key. The first thing is having some point people who are doing those key things. Second is communications, making sure you're talking to, going back and forth with your lobbyists, talking with the key senators and delegates, making sure you get to know them. And then also letting the people in the association know what's going on, what different legislation's coming up, what we have to fight against, and how they can help us out. Because certain districts, certain areas may have a retailer in that area and may have a key senator or delegate on that committee that we're hearing, or that we're going to a hearing for, and we may want that retailer there, because it's better to have a constituent within their district. And then last is participation, figuring out who we can get to participate to help with certain areas. So I'd say those are the key things you need.
Absolutely. And you mentioned communication. Before I get to Matt, Finnie, I want to isolate that on the communication note. How does the association communicate important information to your membership? And what are some best practices to keeping retailers informed and their customers also informed on the issues of the day? I know I can speak from PCA. One of the things that we're trying to do is play air traffic controller with all of the different communications that are going on. You could be inundating people all the time. How do you strike a balance where people are reading the information, they know what's useful, and not missing anything, but not bothering them too much?
So I completely agree with everything Steve just said. Communication is the key with the retailers. We're in different parts. We actually are in a smaller state. I can't imagine the larger states, but right now, we communicate through email. During the session, it's probably every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the issues that are going on in the state. If it's something urgent, we'll pick up the phone and call every retailer in the state to tell them what's going on. Like Steve said, if somebody's in a district and we need a member to reach out to a legislator, we'll call and prep them and tell them what they need to say, or email, call. And then the other thing that we do with our customers, it really depends. If we want a grassroots campaign, then we actually, in our store, we set up a laptop right at the register. And every person that walks in our store during the session, they know how active we are. They're kind of trained now to walk in and they'll say, hey, what's going on in Annapolis? Is there anything we need to do to help you guys? So we keep that laptop right at the register, and we have people fill it out while they're there. Plus send out, email communications to them, but letting them do it right there in the shop is what gets us the most people to sign up and send those messages that we need. Because usually if we do grassroots, it's pretty urgent and we need everyone's help.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we're working on, to do more of those retailer activations in store at the point of purchase. and again, we want to strike that balance. I think, we've had conversations about the tax issues that have coming up, and that at the federal level, that's a huge thing that is on our plate. So I think that there'll be more of that. And we're trying to get some programs out there in conjunction with our PCA 2021 trade show. We'll be releasing some new materials, and then also a new state association guidebook. We decided, I think the last one was sent out 4 years ago. So we're doing a deep dive, and it's essentially a how to communicate with government guide as well. So for folks that are state association leadership, such as yourselves, and we definitely want to get your input and buy-in into this project as well. So we'll send it your way. Matt, I want to move over to you. You are a great contract lobbyist. I get to work with a lot of the folks in the different states, but you guys are very sharp on the ball. Can you walk us through the past state legislative session? What are some of the issues you faced, and what tools or tactics did you use to address them?
So first, thank you, Josh, for those kind words. Obviously, it's been great working with you all at the Premium Cigar Association as well. Certainly it's been a good partnership, and of course working with Finnie and Steve and so many of the other retailers. Before I get to that, I actually just wanted to emphasize one point that Steve and Finnie both brought up and really underscores how critical it is for retailers to get involved and to have a presence, and to know their elected officials. Is that a lot of people you may not necessarily understand that each legislator represents a certain geographical area of the state, and of course they certainly have concern for statewide issues, but at the end of the day, they have to make sure that constituents in their district are happy with, the actions that they're taking and the results that are coming out of Annapolis. So, that's why when we have retailers that have good, strong relationships with their legislators, you never know when it may be very helpful. You may have the right timing, the right place, and the right connection to really help advance the interests of the association. So that's why having broad retailer support and engagement, and having people that engage with their elected officials at the state level to local level is so important. You never know when it may have a critical impact. In terms of this past session, like in so many states and all stakeholders, certainly in Maryland during the COVID-19 pandemic, I know it's been said a million times, but we faced, a session like no one has ever seen before. It was one where public access was almost entirely cut off in person, and it was restricted to remote access. And much to the credit of the presiding officers, it actually, from a technical and process perspective, went off very well. There wasn't much in the way of glitches, and certainly there can be critiques one way or another about how certain aspects of it went, but in terms of the environment that we had to deal with, it went off very, very well. These required changes in how we communicate with legislators, but essentially it was the same. It was the same thing that we were always trying to do: is consistent, effective, and clear communication. Because there were several pieces of legislation that we worked to amend, or oppose, and tried to differentiate premium cigars and tobacco from. There's legislation that was reintroduced that had been submitted in prior years that would have banned flavored tobacco, which unfortunately, in my mind, somewhat inadvertently included premium cigars and pipe tobacco based on some overly broad language. There was legislation that would have enabled tobacco regulation at the local level, and a bill was introduced that would extend wholesale taxes to the out-of-state sellers of premium cigars in Maryland. That bill was ultimately passed by the legislature and let go into law by the governor. So that was another victory we were able to help achieve this section. But again, in terms of the tactics, the strategy, it was largely the same tried and true tactics of consistent, persistent, and effective messaging. Just had to occur through a virtual format. We met with legislators on the committees of jurisdiction on these issues. We pitched our case about how these products are different and not a part of the problem that was trying to be addressed by the proponents of the legislation. And again, we had to have support of the retailers and the Premium Cigar Association, which really helped out through effective grassroots advocacy, which was largely through email and then some phone calls this section. to make sure that legislators, we're hearing from business owners in their district and residents as well about these issues. So all of this, this consistent, effective communication was able to strengthen our position that we are not a part of the problem, that the proponents were seeking to address in these various pieces of legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those grassroots campaigns that, we jointly launch involves a lot of the legislative process. But, just for everybody that's watching their own edification, you're involved with the governor's office, state agencies, and also, when the state legislative session, they're not formally in session, they're still engaging with those elected officials as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and of course, and while, a very significant portion of what we have to achieve with the association occurs during the legislative session in Maryland, which is January through April, the beat goes on, of course, and there's still, there's regulatory work or whether it's just more informal conversations that occur out of session, whether it's, different events, on the golf course or wherever else it may be at different conferences. Communication like that is still key. Again, it's just a little more informal, but it's continuing the education and the outreach, having, elected officials visit, come see various, our stores. And again, just keeping up the communication and, again, as always, harping on it that this is a very different product here. This is not the source of many of the problems that the legislators are trying to address. So we're trying to, again, always make sure that we're in constant contact, with these legislators and regulators so we can continue to keep up the good work that we do.
Absolutely. Steve, I want to shift over to you. Matt does an incredible job. A lot of state associations that are watching it, or potential state associations, I think would love to have a lobbyist at the state level working for them. How does the association sustain operations? What fundraising mechanisms do you have in place to pay for lobbying, but also a political action committee, and one that's fairly robust at the state level?
Right. Well, we have I guess you could say like a two-pronged approach. We have our association, which we use to fund the lobbyist. And then we have our political action committee, which we use to fund the different fundraisers that the legislators have, the state senators and delegates every year. And we use it, that's important because we want to get to know them. And to get to know them, we have to get out in front of them and meet them and go to these different events. So the first one, the lobbyist, you have to look at what is it going to cost us. It could cost you anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 a year. So with dues from our different members, we have, our number of retailers. We try to get money in from there. In the past, we got money in from, PCA. You guys helped us with that. We also try to talk to manufacturers, have fundraisers, things like that. We're doing an auction to try to get money for the association. With the PAC, we also reach out to our retailers and say, hey, this is important. This is why it's important, because we have to get in front of these senators and delegates. So we need you to contribute some money to the PAC. We do a charity golf auction charity golf event every year where we have the manufacturers contribute things to it. So we build up money that way and put that into the PAC. So those are the two main things we do. I mean, it's difficult to fund both because it is expensive and it's important. The lobbyist is very important because he gives us access to these senators and delegates that we need to have access to by having dinners. And they have these dinners with the different committees that are important to us so that we can meet them. And those are expensive. So the association has to pay for that. But yeah, it's very difficult to get money in, but we do what we can, and we push in every direction that we can to get the money.
And I just want to mention, for the folks that are watching, Maryland, we wanted to highlight a shining example of what's working. But again, some of the techniques and tools that they're using are a little more advanced than some of the organizations that are considering starting a state association. So you might not be there, and I don't want people to come away discouraged at all. It started somewhere when Finnie talked about it all forming together. it took some time to get to where they're at now. So I think that the barriers of entry are low, but you have to be able to work hard over some time to build the association up. And
the biggest challenge is getting all the retailers to participate. If we're paying $40,000 on the lobbyists, it basically costs each retailer in our state, say if we have 30 retailers, about $1,333. And that's not going to kill any one business. So if we can get everyone to participate, we could fund everything fairly easily. But that's where the challenge comes in, and that's where it's very difficult. When we go to these different events for the senators and delegates, it can cost anywhere from $200 to $1,000 just to get into the event. So that's expensive, and we have to have money for the PAC to be able to do that, because there's certain key legislators that we have to see every year, and they expect to see us every year. So it adds up. But if we can get every retailer to participate, we'd be golden.
Absolutely. And Finnie, I want to ask, you have had leadership roles at both the National Association and the State Association. What advice would you give other state association or just general association leadership as it relates to communication, advocacy, and operation? How does it all come together?
I mean, it is a lot of work. It's hard. It took us 9 years to officially form, from the first time I went to Annapolis. We were together working with the retailers, but nothing was like official on paper for 9 years. And, we had a legislator tell us, you guys need to form, and he said the most important thing that we need to see is a logo, with your name and all those retailers listed down the side on the letterhead. And he said, so when you walk into my office, I can look at that list on the side and say, oh, there's a retailer that's in my district. I need to pay attention to this bill and see what's going on and make sure I'm not going to hurt that business in my district. So it takes time. And I think the other most important thing is the retailers have to understand at this point, when you're trying to form this group, you have to put the competition aside. You have to put, I don't like this retailer. I don't like that retailer. They do this, they do that. And you have to really come together as one group and work together. We're all trying to fight the same thing. We want to keep our taxes down. We want to be allowed to smoke in our stores. So it's just taking your time and working. And eventually, like we've slowly, we probably started as a group of 3 retailers fighting this at the very beginning. So I would say we have a core group of maybe 10 right now. It's still not a lot, but next year we're going to try and pull in 3 more. So it takes time, and people eventually see we are doing a good thing. And we've managed to keep that 15% tobacco tax for almost 20 years now. That's a long time to hold a tobacco tax. And it's because the retailers are working together and meeting with the legislators and working with our lobbyists. So it's just patience and time, and it eventually comes together.
Yeah. And you mentioned, trying to get 3 new retailers. I'm sure setting some goals, realistic expectations for the future. I think for those groups that are considering starting a state association, kind of having a blueprint of what the first 3 years look like, and some of those initial goals of where they can remain effective would be important. Matt, one more thing on the political environment. Maryland is a challenging state when it comes to a lot of political activities, often divided government. We even saw this a little bit more challenging as it related to the localities with restrictions and that. How does the state association remain effective in that challenging environment? And sometimes where things don't necessarily go the right way, how do you motivate people so that they're not discouraged by a small setback?
Yeah, no, of course. Certainly there have been setbacks at times, but it's been a very challenging past year, for so many people in so many industries in so many ways. But in terms of what, the association can do, it's, again, as I always say, it's consistent, persistent, effective communication. And, it goes back to one of the key things that, we have to continue to build on as an association is making sure that, we have, a political leader, a political ally in each jurisdiction or, in each major jurisdiction. Building and, creating that will be helpful to make sure that we have a spokesperson, at each government level that can articulate, the interests of this industry. So again, it's going back to just the basics and making sure that we stay at it. We're persistent. We continue to stay in front, of legislators at the state and local level, and continue to drive home the message of how, these products, this is a different market. This isn't, that's so many of the problems that they're trying to get at. We understand, obviously, can work together on a lot of areas, but, we have to be able to adequately and succinctly fulfill, the needs that this industry has. So, again, it just goes back to those consistent, effective communications and being able to do it at the state and local level. And, that's something that we need to build on.
Great.
And Josh, one thing, if I could add, another key point is finding out who the senators and delegates are that are cigar smokers. If you can find those guys and talk to them, they understand, what a premium cigar is different than what you're going to find at 7-Eleven or, CVS. So it's super important to get to know them, get them on board, and they'll even reach out to you when something's coming down, legislative wise, and tell you, hey, you guys need to look at this, or this is what's going on. They'll try to help you out. So that's key.
Absolutely, building that relationship so that you're the go-to expert when it comes to tobacco policy and some of the tax and small business policy. That's excellent advice. And Steve, I'm going to throw you a curveball question. I know that you had some media opportunities that came up regarding some of the activities that were going on at the local level. Can you talk us about that process? And, is this, an area where state associations and leadership in the retail sector should be prepared to speak on the record to newspapers, radio stations, whatnot?
Definitely. And you got to be careful because, you can get burned depending on what media outlet it wants to talk to you. But if you feel they're going to be helpful to your cause, then definitely talk to them. Definitely get the message out there that we are different. Premium cigars are different. And I think people understand that. So you got to be prepared. You got to know what you're talking about. And you got to make sure you know who the media outlet is before you talk to them too.
Yeah, of course, kind of playing to the audience to really grow the reach and the effectiveness of the association. And Steve, you serve on the board of directors of the PCA as well. And I've had the pleasure of sitting on a lot of the calls that the Maryland Association does with you, Finnie, and Matt. And how do you envision a relationship of a state association working with a national association? What tools and kind of give and take does that, where a relationship like that works and blossoms?
Well, we mentioned fundraising is huge. So anything that the Premium Cigar Association can do to help us with fundraising would be great. The next thing is also the email blasts and the system you guys have set up to contact these senators and delegates. That's very important and very, very helpful. So that has helped us out in the past, and I think that'll continue to help us out.
Absolutely.
Two key areas.
And Josh, if I can add one thing too, I know being on the board in the past and even now, just the knowledge that you bring, when we have a question, hey, have you guys seen this happen at the national level? It's key for us, to be able to work with you to know if something's going on, and you might be able to tell us this worked in another state. Maybe you guys can try it in Maryland. So we all have to work together. We all want the same thing. And, having the National Association with the state association working hand in hand is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point. One of the things that we've talked about building out from the national perspective is like a database of model legislation for things that are good for the cigar industry. One of the things that, Glenn, myself, and Scott, and, Greg Zimmerman and John Anderson have talked about is, taking the battle to them instead of being defensive and reactionary, always trying to work with the state associations to come up with positive legislation. We're seeing that. We're working in New York as another state, very active retail sector to try to roll back the tax and then also get cigar bar legislation in place. And Delaware, and it's funny because the success that you all have had in Maryland with preserving that tax cap. Delaware is saying, hey, our neighbor has only 15%. We want to lower ours from 30 to 15. And Maryland is actually being used as an example in legislation that they're putting forth there. So it's all interconnected. Finnie, for the folks that are watching in Maryland, how can they get involved, whether they're a consumer or a retailer? Obviously, we encourage folks to join the association, but are there other ways that they can engage, stay informed, things like that?
I mean, honestly, anyone that wants information, I hand out my cell phone number all the time. They can reach out to me. They can reach out to Steve. I know they can reach out to you and get our contact information. But we're willing to talk to anyone that's interested in helping. We'll be glad to, have them join the calls, see what's going on, and see where they might be able to help us.
Great. I want to just go around the horn again once more. Any final thoughts or pieces of advice for the state association leadership or people considering to start and form an association? Matt, I'll start with you.
Thanks. Yeah. Again, I'll say it's nothing sexy. It's nothing flashy. It's just almost routine and mundane, but it's consistent, clear, consistent communication and articulating it effectively. Doing it time and again, day after day, month after month, and year after year. And I think it's also been brought up earlier that, measure your successes, and make it practical. If it's adding, if it's just opening up an association or starting one, start with 5 members, try to build to 10, next year or 2 years, but, measure your successes and build on them.
Thanks. Steve?
The key is, I think, being proactive. The winners in this world make it happen. The losers sit back and let it happen. You can't sit back and let it happen. You've got to make it happen because no one else is going to do it for you. And if you don't, they're gonna tax you out of business. So you got to get involved. You got to get in there. You got to talk to the senators and delegates, and you got to educate them, make them aware, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to go down there and talk to them. Don't be afraid to testify. It has to happen.
Absolutely. Finnie?
I would just say anyone that is interested, I mean, Josh, they can reach out to you. They can reach out to us. We're happy to help answer any questions, but don't wait till, the tax is already at the table, in your state capital. You have to get organized. You have to talk to the retailers and, be ready for that day. It's coming for everybody. I mean, it's not, they're not going to let any of us get away without trying to tax us or put smoking restrictions on us. So just try and talk to the retailers in your state and, start that first step, and feel free to reach out to any of us with any questions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for sharing your best practices, your experience and insights. For the folks that are watching, if you're in a state that doesn't have an association or you're not involved, please feel free to reach out to myself or Scott or Glenn, and we're happy to put you in touch with your state association leadership. If you're thinking about forming one, we will have a guide ready by the trade show, and we'll have that on our website shortly after. We're continuing to build new resources to ensure that we have the proper defense of the industry, but also a proactive strategy, as Steve mentioned. So if we're missing something at all, please feel free to reach out to us and provide that feedback so that we can work on something that would be helpful to you as a retailer or an employee of a retail shop, to be involved in advocacy, involved in your state association, and get consumers and really build that grassroots army that everybody is hoping for. But again, thanks everybody for your time and attention. We look forward to, Steve and Finnie, look forward to seeing you in a few weeks in Vegas. And Matt, you're invited as well. I'll put you on the spot there. You're welcome to come to Vegas with us. So thanks.
Yep, I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Josh.